Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. Thank you all for tuning in today. I want to talk about when somebody is a saver and another one is a spender in a relationship. This is something that I deal with very often in my financial planning practice. It's very common, nothing to be ashamed of here, by the way. The good news is that there is hope and there's a way to make it work. So a lot of times we hear that opposites attract, right? And that's true. That's usually like a physics thing, the yin and the yang and so on and so forth. Now, that could be something that is very positive in a relationship, but at the beginning, if not managed properly, it could also be a source of friction because a lot of the time, especially in finances, you're going to butt heads, especially if one is a spender and one is a saver. So today I want to talk about some of the things that you could do to actually make it work. You know, you guys got together for a reason. So obviously you also do have things in common. Doesn't mean that you're opposites in everything, but there are certain things that you're opposite in. And again, that could be a good thing because then you balance each other out. You know, I've seen couples where somebody's a super saver and they really just try to maximize their savings at any cost. You know, and sometimes they forego enjoying life a little bit as a result. Their partner is the complete opposite, is a super spender, and they, you know, enjoy themselves now, but they're also putting their future financial, their future finances at risk. You know, so there's a way to just kind of balance each other out. The spender can help the saver. Hey, listen, it's okay. You know, maybe spend a little bit on yourself, whatever, and the other one can help the spender say, look, maybe you could put X amount away, or here's why, here's a way that you can still put money away and still not feel like you're missing out, right? So there's definitely an opportunity here to work together, balance it out, make it work, and make both parties happy. Now, the first thing I recommend is to not ignore the conversation. This is something that is super important. You know, some people put things off a lot of the time just to not get into an argument. So they'll rather just say, hey, let me just ignore it, not talk about it, sweep it under the rug. You know, the conversation needs to be had, especially when you're first starting. You got to lay it all out on the table. You the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, again, you got together for a reason. You need to be honest from the very get-go, you know, because when you're not, then that can snowball into something even more negative down the line, you know. For example, you might have heard the term financial infidelity. There are people out there who either have a separate bank account that they didn't tell their spouse about. Maybe it's a spending habit. Maybe they just, I don't know, they like to buy lottery tickets or something and they just like keep that from their spouse. You know, little things that, you know, at first may not seem like they're big, but when your partner finds out, then they start wondering, well, what else are you hiding from me if you're hiding this small thing from me, right? And that can snowball into something else that, you know, could create even more problems in your relationship. So the first thing I recommend is for you to, first of all, have the conversation, have the courage to have it, be open, be honest, lay it all out, you know, in terms of, hey, you know, here's what my credit score looks like. Here's what my current debt situation looks like. Here's what my credit card balances look like. You know, it may not be easy, but if you're planning on building a life together, you're going to be making joint decisions in the future, very likely, right? And your current situation will eventually have to come out. You know, let's say you decide to buy a house in the future and you lie about how much debt you have. Well, when they run your credit for that mortgage application, it's going to come out. You don't want to have that conversation there in front of like a loan officer at the bank, right? You want to have these conversations way ahead of time so that you can both plan accordingly. Number two, while you're having this conversation, be very empathetic, be very open to listening to your partner and hearing where they come from, because it's not necessarily something that's being done with any bad intention. There's usually a reason behind it. Money means a lot of different things to different people. I've seen people that have had similar upbringings, and because of that upbringing, have a complete takeaway of their relationship with money. So let me give you an example. Let's say you grew up with not much, right? It was like you saw your parents struggle with money. There wasn't much money in the house. And, often you wanted to buy things and you couldn't, and you was all being told, no, I can't afford it. We're not Rockefellers. Money doesn't grow on trees, right? You might have heard things like that growing up. Now, it's possible that some people, as a result of that, they become super savers because they say, I never want to be in that situation that I grew up in. I remember my parents always having to tell me no, always, borrowing the neighbor's car or borrowing money from people because they didn't have money. So guess what? I'm going to save every penny I can so that if I ever do need money, I have it, right? So that person gets security from money. And their goal is to never feel like they don't have any. As a result, though, they may become super savers to the extent where they don't really even let themselves enjoy themselves much because they don't spend a dime except for the needed stuff and then save everything else, right? So that can cause a problem in a relationship if paired with somebody who has a different view. Now, the partner may have had a very similar experience growing up, getting told no, money doesn't grow on trees, we're not Rockefellers, seeing parents struggle, borrowing from, other family members, so on and so forth. And they might have gotten a complete different money relationship from that very same scenario and say, you know what? I grew up with nothing. I didn't enjoy growing up being told no. I couldn't have the things I wanted because my parents never had money. Well, guess what? Now that I'm working and I'm making money, I'm going to enjoy myself. So every time I want to go take a trip, I'm going to take it. If I want to buy a new purse, new shoes, new pair of sneakers, new coat, and new toy, guess what? I'm going to get it. I'm going to drive a nice car because when I grew up, my parents didn't have a nice car. There was a hole on the floor. Well, I'm going to buy myself a nice car because I work hard and I deserve it, right? Similar upbringings, complete different outlooks in relationship with money. And that's okay. Either one isn't right or wrong. So when you're having this conversation, you want to be open. You also want to be empathetic. You want to see where your partner is coming from so that you can have a better understanding as to why they think the way they do, because that opens the door for them compromising. Say, you know what? I'm sorry. I hear you, right? I hear you. People want to be heard. People want to be understood. They do not want to be judged. So if you're the super saver, don't immediately get on your partner for spending too much. Oh, you always do this, this, and that. There's a reason behind that, right? So come at it from an open-mindedness, empathetic way of looking at it. Let them feel like they've been heard, not judged. And then you're opening up the conversation for some true balance, some happy middle ground that you can find. Now, let me tell you some actual things that I do with my clients to help get on that same page, right? So once you've had the conversation, you've laid it out. The one thing you want to do then is, especially if you're joining your lives together, you're going to have joint expenses, whether it's a mortgage, rent, insurance, utilities, things of that sort. I work with couples where one spouse might say, okay, I pay the rent or the mortgage, and the other spouse says, I take care of the utilities. That's great. Now, maybe there's a way we could start working together as opposed to just saying, hey, you pay this, I pay that. It might be a good step to just open up a joint checking account, right? You put in the agreed upon amounts into that account, and you can still do the same. You might still be responsible for the rent while your spouse is responsible for the utilities. But instead of paying them separately, put them in a joint account because now you're both working together. And some months you might alternate. Hey, listen, you handle the bills this month. You go into the account and pay the rent and all this other stuff, even though it's your money, right? The same money you were spending before, but now it's a joint effort. And you both have an idea of what's happening coming in and out in terms of the expenditures of the household. The second thing that can come from that is ultimately you're going to have joint goals. That's going to be either buying a house, it could be saving for a vacation, anything like that, a big trip, wedding anniversaries, or whatever your joint goals might be, a new car, etc. Well, then you want to open up a joint savings account and then also have predetermined, agreed upon amounts that you want to put in that account. So you're going to say, listen, and you can do this. Obviously, not everything's 50-50 because one of you might make more than the other. You can make it just as a percentage of salary, for example, if that's one way of looking at it. You can say, okay, I'm going to put 80% of my salary into this, and you put 80% of yours. That way the remaining 20 can still be discretionary income to the other partner. So you're both meeting your goals that were joint. You're both paying all of your expenses. And at the same time, you still have a sense of freedom. Now, the saver can say, you know what, I'm just going to save most of this 20% that I got left. And the spender can say, I'm going to spend most of the 20% that I got left. Well, that's okay, because as long as you've already have these predetermined amounts to pay your fixed expenses and also your joint future goals, then it shouldn't create any problems because you're both holding up your end of the deal. Another way that I have clients do this is if they're having other money, because different people are at different stages. That step one might only be to just open up a checking account. That may be a very huge first step for people. Some people are more comfortable where like all of their income gets deposited into a joint account, and then from there, bills get paid, and then joint savings and investment goals go out from there as well. In that case, I have my clients give each other a predetermined amount. I'm going to use the word allowance. You could call it whatever you want, but ultimately a predetermined amount that you both agree on and say, okay, every single week, we're each going to take out $100 for ourselves. That is your discretionary income for you to do as you please. Haircuts, self-care, going out to eat, grabbing a few drinks, etc. Now, the reason I do that is because usually you don't tend to overspend on your fixed expenses. If you rent, you usually don't send your landlord extra money. You don't send your cable bill extra money. You don't send your phone bill extra money, right? It's usually on the discretionary amounts that we tend to overspend, whether we shop too much or we went out to eat too much, etc. Right? So by giving yourselves each other that predetermined amount that you agree on, you're now saying, okay, listen, you get your 100, always make it even, regardless of who makes what, because that removes one barrier from it. It's like, okay, we're on equal footing here. Now, if you're the saver and you're getting your $100 and you only spend 40, great for you. You have $60 left over. Next week, still take your 100, just like you agreed on, and you can continue to save just like you wanted to, right? If you're the spender, you can spend the whole $100, and guess what? Next week, there'll be another $100 there from your joint budget, right? Now, there's no reason to argue anymore because you both agreed on an amount. Whatever you do with that amount, that's up to each individual. And that way, there's no reason for fighting because you're paying all your joint expenses and money's still going out for your joint savings and investment goals. And that removes a lot of the pressure. And it also makes people feel independent, especially the ones that are the savers. They don't want to be controlled. So you don't want to feel like you're being controlled. If you're given this predetermined amount that you both agreed on, then it's all great. Doesn't matter what he or she does with that, right? Doesn't matter what your partner does with that. So that's a great way of doing it. Now, when you're saving, it's also great to have different buckets for short term. So let's say you're building up an emergency savings. There are some banks out there, some online lender banks that you can set up a savings account, and then it has buckets as part of that account. So you don't have to open like individual accounts for each goal. You could just have different goals within the account. And that's one of the things I always recommend my clients, because then you can have one for your emergency savings, one for a down payment on a house, one for home renovations, any project you have, and one for vacation, one for holiday spending. That way, every single month, you already agreed as your joint budget. All right, $100 a month goes into this particular, holiday spending account. That way, when the holidays come, that money is already there because you've already been saving it throughout the year. And then you don't have to worry about, well, I'm going to pay for this. Well, I bought my mom this, and et cetera, right? So being together, right, especially if you're opposite, it's going to be a little friction. So let's try and remove as many barriers to that as possible. So there's a way of doing it, right? Another thing that I recommend is for you to have money dates at least once a month. You can meet for a quick 15, 20 minutes. Just have a check-in with you and say, hey, how are you doing this month? Did you, were you able to reach your savings goal? Did you still put money in your 401k, or did you still pay down the debt that you were paying? And so on and so forth. Did your balances on your credit cards go down? It might have not been huge because it's only a month, but as long as you're moving in the right direction, you have those check-ins and you make sure that you're each holding up the end of the bargain and just be accountable to each other, right? And sometimes it takes a little bit to adjust. So just be open-minded again. Things might need to be adjusted because you might have thought one figure might have worked for you, and turns out that it wasn't enough because you forgot about something, right? So just be open-minded, be willing to meet in the middle somewhere. And, sometimes that's not something that you can do on your own. If you cannot, I highly recommend that you work with a third party like a financial planner. There are money therapists or coaches, depending on what you need. But ultimately, a third party that has experience working with couples, has experience working with money and couples, and can take a non-biased approach and just say, hey, here's what I see. Here's how I think you guys can make things work, and just hear you out. If you need that, might not be a bad idea, right? Because then you might learn some tools that you can then implement on your own, and that way have a better shot at having a successful partnership. Because it is what it is, right? It's definitely a partnership. So I hope you find this useful. I would love to hear what you do as a couple to make things work. If you happen to be in a relationship, one of you is a saver, one of you is a spender, I'd love to hear any of the challenges you've had, and also any tips you might want to share, because I'm always curious to see what you guys are doing out there. I do the allowance thing where we just have a predetermined amount. Also, another great tip, actually, you can determine an amount that you say, hey, listen, each of us has the go-ahead to spend $200 a month from the joint account, no questions asked, and any amount over 200, we need to have a conversation. You're not asking for permission, you're just having a discussion, right? So that's another way you can say, okay, you know what? Anything under 200, we both don't have to run it by each other. Anything over 200 or whatever, you make the amount. Then we need to have a conversation. You're going to spend $1,000, we got to talk about it, because that way there's that accountability, there's a check-in, there's no surprises, and less likely that you're going to argue about it. All right, well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope to see you in the next episode. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com. If you want to schedule a complimentary consultation, go to buildabetterfinancialfuture.com and click on the schedule a call button. I hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.